Good evening and welcome to tonight's program about the experiences, challenges, and contributions that an ambassador spouse. Diplomatic spouses have a vital role in American diplomacy, and we are so excited. It's important and, sorry about that. We're really excited to highlight this important yet often overlooked diplomatic role. My name is Kelly Scandoni, and I am the programs coordinator for the Diplomacy Center Foundation. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, we are the nonprofit partner to the State Department in creating the National Museum of American Diplomacy. Right now, the museum is under development in Washington, D.C., and once opened, it will be the nation's first museum dedicated to American diplomacy. Tonight's program is the result of a new partnership between the Diplomacy Center Foundation and the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training as part of an Una Chapman Cox Foundation project on American diplomacy and the Foreign Service. Please keep in mind that tonight's conversation expresses the personal opinions of our panelists, and it does not reflect the views of the State Department, the U.S. government, or any other organization. I also do want to make a note that we are getting some weather here in the Washington, D.C. area. So if you hear any rumbling or some of our audio or visuals go out, just to have patience with us. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. First, we have Clayton Bond, who is an attorney, small business owner, activist, and former Foreign Service officer. He accompanied his spouse, Ted Osius, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Vietnam. Next, we have Vicki Butler, who is a journalist, freelance writer, and editor. She worked alongside her spouse, Tim Carney, throughout most of his Foreign Service career and during his appointments as ambassador to Sudan and Haiti. Next, we have Toni Stearns, who is part of a 3-generation Foreign Service family. She and her spouse, Monty Stearns, spent 26 years together at his posts throughout Africa and Europe, including his ambassadorships to the Ivory Coast and Greece. Last but certainly not least is Gretchen Welch, a Foreign Service officer who worked alongside her spouse, David Welch, for more than 26 years during their Foreign Service postings and his appointment as ambassador to Egypt. Moderating tonight's conversation is Bonnie Miller. She is a psychotherapist, professor, anti-trafficking activist, and mental health education and conflict resolution trainer. She also accompanied her spouse on tours over his 29-year career in the Foreign Service, including his ambassadorships to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Greece. Bonnie is also the lead interviewer and host for ADST's Partners in Diplomacy podcast project, which highlights and preserves the experiences of spouses and longtime partners of officers in the U.S. government's foreign affairs community. So please watch the ADST website as this exciting new podcast will be released this fall. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Bonnie to kick off tonight's conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our audience and welcome to our panelists. We are coming to you from Old Town Alexandria, Gretchen and I, Vicki from Idaho, Toni from Massachusetts, Clayton from DC, and Gretchen and I are in the middle of a huge thunderstorm. So if you hear the thunder and the fire engines, that's what's going on. Our panelists come from diverse backgrounds. They have diverse posts and experiences. When their husbands were ambassadors in Africa, Europe, Asia, Caribbean, and the Middle East. So we have a wide variety and times spanning from the 1970s to only 4 years ago. So we have a diverse group of diverse experiences. And I urge you to watch the ADST.org website, because the podcasts are coming out and I've interviewed 20 spouses, including some of our panelists who have wonderful stories. So being the ambassador's spouse is being a partner in diplomacy. You don't apply for the position, but you're serving in it. You don't have a job description and you don't get a salary. And it's different in every post and in every era. So some people think that it just involves going to parties and giving parties. So I wanted to ask our panel, starting with Toni and going through from most distant to most recent. What does an ambassador spouse really do, and what were your responsibilities?
And you want to start with me? Well, I am the relic, having joined with my husband as two for the price of one when we married in 1959. And this was the Eisenhower era, if one can even think of it now. And I went through until 1989, almost 40 years, where I was the helping spouse. I wasn't paid. I hadn't thought about being paid. I was raised to consider myself a helper. And happily, I thought it was the most wonderful life. And therefore, I didn't mind. I'm sure later on, as I grew older, I went through the usual bouts of feeling martyred or angry or feeling that it wasn't fairly shared. But on the whole, I really don't do angst. And I have to say that I was very happy, give or take whatever moments everybody has in a long, long life. And when one is married and you have to make choices, I found that the choice I made was a quite happy one because I really loved being in the Foreign Service. And therefore, I had no more gripes than any other spouse would have about a spouse's job. It is going to interfere with your time. It is going to keep them away from your children. We had 4 born in rapid succession. I had 4 children under 5 when Monty became a DCM. So I had a lot of work to do, both as a mother and as a wife. And I handled it with the usual successes and failures. And that's just life.
Okay, so Vicki, what
I
were
should
some of
really
your
stop there.
responsibilities in Sudan and in Haiti as the spouse of an ambassador?
I think that once the State Department reformed and wives were no longer part of their husbands' efficiency reports, and you weren't really a factor, a big factor anyway, in how they were rated in terms of their own promotions, wives were able to kind of chart, if they wanted to, their own paths in a place that they were, depending on how busy the post was, how many people were in the post. So, oh, sorry, my earbud came out. So when we were in Sudan, I was able to teach English at the oldest women's university in Africa. And that took me into a completely different world than if I had really been on the diplomatic circuit. Our embassy was relatively small, and at that time, our relations were, of course, terrible with Sudan. But for me, it was fantastic because I was spending most of my days with the foreign part of the Foreign Service in the community of very educated and wonderful women. Haiti was a bit different because Haiti at that time was a focal point of the administration's interests, and we had a constant stream of visitors. So I was doing much more entertaining and the care and feeding of congressmen and members of the administration. And even then, though, I found that some of our visitors were very interested in what they could do beyond the politics. And an example would be now Governor of Ohio, Senator DeWine. His wife was extremely interested in orphanages. And they founded a school in Haiti, and they took care of, probably a dozen orphanages. And I sort of got dragged into this orphanage thing because of the DeWines, and they visited us 6 times over a period of like 19 months. So I think each post gives you opportunities, and part of being a spouse is, whether you're overseas or whether you're in America, part of just being married is being flexible and imaginative. And so I that's what I found, is that each place was a little bit different, and there were lots of opportunities. You just had to figure out what the opportunities were in that particular place.
So Gretchen, when your husband David was ambassador in Egypt in the early 2000s, sorry for the thunder here, you were wearing 2 hats. You are part of a tandem, meaning that you are a Foreign Service officer yourself, and your husband was ambassador. So what were some of your responsibilities as the ambassador's spouse, in addition to your job in the embassy?
Well, it's great to be with everybody tonight, and thank you to the Diplomacy Center for recognizing what I think is an incredible role and an underlooked role in the Foreign Service. As a young woman officer who joined the Foreign Service in 1980, I realized that many of the women with whom I was privileged to serve, ambassador spouses, had been officers themselves and had to resign because they got married. Now, and I believe that policy changed in like 1973, but I was privileged to serve with people like Betty Lou Hummel, Alice Pickering, Phyllis Oakley, who were foreign. I think Betty Lou is in the Foreign Service, but certainly Alice and Phyllis were, and had to resign when they got married. So I was made aware of the incredible talents and contributions of our ambassador spouses early on. I want to say, in addition to Egypt, Bonnie, for 2 years, I was the chargé's spouse in Saudi Arabia. And I see one of our attendees tonight, Dee Cutler, who was a fabulous example to me when I was chargé's spouse, working, pregnant, about to have a baby, and trying to navigate how to work in Saudi Arabia. Dee was an incredible role model, still very popular, well known for her photographic skills and for her love of Saudi society. And someone like Dee made it possible for someone like me. I think I was at the forefront. Remote work was not really possible, but due to some incredible colleagues in Washington, I was able to continue working for both of my assignments, who supervised me remotely, who counseled me, and who worked with me. So I was really lucky. I worked on the Middle East Partnership Initiative in Egypt, and I was able to complement so well what I wanted to do as an ambassador spouse, which was outreach, work in the community, especially for us at the time we were in Egypt, just after 9/11. It was a really important part of my work.
So Clayton, you're our most modern ambassador spouse, having served with your husband, Ted Osius, when he was ambassador to Vietnam from 2014 to 2017, very recently. So tell us about what you did as ambassador spouse, what your responsibilities were, and how you contributed.
I feel like it's such a big question, and so much of the essence of it, Toni and Gretchen and Vicki spoke on, and so just as they mentioned, when Toni was talking about being a helper, like that's very much what I did, and the another word that I was thinking of is supporter. I wanted to support Ted in to achieve success in his role, while also the helper part, particularly with respect to our family, because we had 2 small kids, and so helping him achieve his dream of a successful ambassadorship to, the country where he most wanted to serve in that role, while also ensuring that, our family's needs were looked after as well. So I could go on, but I don't think we have time for that. So if there are more questions later, happy to expound upon.
There will be more pertinent questions where you can expand on that. We all have experience hosting 4th of July parties. Some of us, Toni and myself, have probably, and well, Gretchen for Egypt, all of us have been shaking 1,500 hands in the beating down sun on the 4th of July. And also, as Vicki mentioned, hosting guests. We in Athens had Michael Bloomberg and a dozen of his entourage twice, once for a mayor's conference in Athens and another time because New York wanted to bid on the Olympics and Athens had the Olympics. So he came for a week each time with 12 of his colleagues. So many of us have had high profile and high maintenance guests, but that is also a way of meeting really interesting people. Yes, we gave parties, we hosted parties. We had a lot of celebrities, we had government leaders, we met really interesting people. And all parties have a purpose. And when you have a visiting delegation, it's to expose them to the host country and to expose the host country to them so they can meet the people and get the information that they need. So I think we all did that in our various posts. So, but besides working with the host country, we as ambassador spouses also worked with our husbands to improve relations within the American community. So I wanted to ask you what you did with the American embassy community to improve morale, and not only the Americans in the embassy, but also the locally employed staff who, when we come and go, they stay permanently. And so we need to do a lot to keep them happy and keep them feeling that they are so valuable as they really are. So anybody can raise your hand and tell us what you did to improve morale. Clayton, and then.
Oh, thank you. I mean, one of the things that both Ted and I enjoyed so much was to bring the tradition that we learned from then Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas Greenfield, because I worked in African Affairs Bureau under her leadership, and he had reported to her earlier when she was DGHR, Director General of the Foreign Service, and he was on a detail. And one of the things she did in each of those assignments was she would celebrate everybody's birthday each month. So there would be a birthday party for all of her team, all the staff in the Bureau, to come, meet with her, have cake, with her DASs. And so we decided to carry that tradition to Hanoi. And we loved it so much because we got to see everybody in a more relaxed kind of setting and smaller setting. It's a big mission, but this was a way to have a good gathering, smaller sized gathering every month to see everybody. So we kept it going during our time. And there were local staff who would tell us, like, we've been with the embassy for like 20 years and this is the first time we've ever been inside the residence, and thank you so much. So anyway, it meant a lot to us, and it seemed to mean a lot to the mission as well, both Americans and local staff.
Right, so even getting an invitation to the ambassador's residence means so much to Americans, especially newcomers, and also to the locally employed staff. Toni.
Yes, Monty and I made a point of having everybody over, and we tried to get at least one American or more if we gave a really important dinner. We would have a junior officer not there to pass nuts, but to actually be there. And we also had the Marines at Thanksgiving or Christmas. We had ice cream parties on the 4th of July. We had a pool in Athens and a tennis court. And probably the biggest error I ever made was to open it up to the embassy because we had little kids driving through the house in their wet bathing suits at all hours. And I probably shouldn't have, or at least I should have kept it to one weekend once every month. But it was open 3 days a week, and it utterly ruined our house. But anyway, I learned.
Let me just interrupt for a second, because we were the recipients of that when we arrived with 2 elementary school kids. Monty was our ambassador, you were our ambassador's spouse, and our kids went to the pool and in the house where we finally lived many years later. But it was a huge opportunity for them to meet other kids, for them to have recreation. So I know from doing it the other way, how hard it is for a spouse, but it was so meaningful, especially for newcomers. Go ahead,
Could I
Toni.
just add one other thing? Monty and I served in several posts in Africa and then Laos, where the aid mission was enormous. And I also made very sure that the aid wives came to the house just as much as the embassy wives. And I found the aid wives a lot easier. First of all, they tended to be married to practical types who were out there building roads and digging things. And they were used to living in difficult posts, and they didn't ask for anything, but they loved to come over. And they came over with their kids or with their husbands or wives, whatever. And I found that by mixing up the embassy and the aid and the local staff, that you created a very good sense that we're all in this at the same time.
Okay, Gretchen.
Well, you know, like Toni,
Oh, I better mute. I got the
yeah,
rain
lots
and
of
the fire.
thunder, yeah. As a quasi-relic, my first assignment as chief of mission spouse when we were in Saudi Arabia, there wasn't any internet, there wasn't cable TV. You know, we did have I think it was VCR, you know, library at the embassy, but it was really hard for people to call their families, be $1 a minute. So it was really important to us that we have the community at holidays and the American community, and as many of these kinds of occasions when you really miss home. We had a very large American community expatriate in Saudi Arabia as well, and we really wanted to help them feel at home, both military, private contractors, and others. So we spent a fair amount of time, probably more than we expected, but just because our community really was really lonely. People missed home. So now I know that's so different, right? With internet, and you can FaceTime with your family if you're away. But I do think the community relationship is still very important.
Okay, Vicki.
We did a couple things to build morale, and they were sort of different in each post. But in Haiti and in Sudan, one of the things we did was we had these welcome and farewell parties.
Yes.
And the way we organized them was as a roast. So someone from the economic section would be departing, and Tim would ask his or her boss to write a little roast. And the person who was departing would also be able to invite 6 people who were their contacts, who they appreciated, to the residence. And so we'd end up with a very large crowd, and Tim would then read these roasts. and then give everybody a little certificate. And the best part of it was the laughter, but also was the fact that each of them got to invite who they wanted to their own farewell at the ambassador's residence. And we used the same occasion to welcome people who had just arrived. So that was one thing that we did. Sudan was a small post. Haiti was quite large, between the US aid and the security and all the various components that were at the embassy. The second thing we did was for the 4th of July. I don't quite know how we hit upon it, but it turned out to be a huge success. We had a very diverse staff. And instead of offering the normal hamburgers and hot dogs, I got together with a bunch of Americans and said, what if we do a party that features a diversity of food, and that we have food stations, Haitian Americans, Asian Americans, African Americans, Cuban Americans, Italian Americans. And as a group, we came up with this menu for each of these stations. We made signs, we did all kinds of things, and everybody loved it. And then we put together a music reel for those parties that also featured, sort of the huge diversity of America, and particularly the diversity of the people who were part of our staff and part of the embassy. And I'm telling you, it was surprising. People, first of all, they loved participating and creating these food stands. And then they loved just the whole idea of, we did have hamburgers and hot dogs too, but all the rest of it was really nice. So those were sort of two different things we did to kind of make everybody feel part of the larger family.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that we all worked with the community liaison officer. Toni didn't have one for most of her career, but by the time Monty was ambassador in Athens, there was a wonderful CLO. And I think we all coordinated. The CLO would give us feedback as to what was needed. I know that when my husband was DCM in Athens and ambassador in Athens and ambassador in Sarajevo, we had a newcomers orientation so that people could learn a little bit about the country and how the embassy worked, and it got families to get together to meet new people. We also in Bosnia, this was my husband's idea. He says, I'm wearing a suit every day. I got to get out there, get into the communities, get my hands dirty. And he really did. We had house cleanings. Now, this is not being a maid in somebody's house. This was right after the war in Bosnia, where so many houses and apartment buildings had been destroyed. And so we got out there with our picks and shovels and hard hats, with our locally employed staff, with our American community, and also with the locals in the village where we were cleaning houses. And we took away the debris so that their homes could be rebuilt. We also did Habitat for Humanity in Athens, and we worked with refugee children. So the embassy people would come and do programs and holidays and food with the refugee children, of which there were many, in a wonderful organization run by a Greek priest, but these were refugee children from mostly the Middle East and Muslim countries. So that was interesting too. So we all promoted American culture. We all had Art and Embassies program. I know for Sarajevo, it was right after the war, and everybody has a theme for Art and Embassies. Ours was peace, reconciliation, and bridges. And the Art and Embassies program, for those people who don't know, is bringing in works, be it paintings or sculptures, installations, whatever, by American artists to showcase American art. So who would like to be first to talk about how you brought culture, whether through Art and Embassies or hosting cultural bigwigs, cultural celebrities at your embassies when you were ambassador's spouse?
I think we all did.
Okay, yeah, okay, Gretchen, and then,
Well, we had a bit of a unique situation in Cairo. We had just arrived in August 2001, and then September 11th happened less than a month after we arrived. So we were told by Art and Embassies that because of insurance and other reasons, they weren't going to be able to send us a shipment for quite a while. So working with a member of our cultural affairs staff, we went to local Egyptian artists and borrowed some works
Ooh,
to put in the residence.
Fantastic.
And it
wonderful.
really was a great thing. I have to say, first of all, I learned a lot I met all these wonderful artists. Second, I think people really appreciated that we showcased the works, and being after September 11th and the lead hijacker was an Egyptian, I think it was an important symbol that, you know, we really valued our relationship with Egypt, and it's just a wonderful we made it up as we were going along, but it ended up being a really special collaboration that we enjoyed very much.
Wow, that's a great idea. We did something a little similar in Haiti. There was a woman, a Haitian woman, who was married to an American conductor who was the conductor for the UCLA symphony. And we organized together with the French embassy. The French ambassador's wife had a great friend who was a fantastic concert pianist. And we organized a concert in Haiti with the American conductor and this Haitian pianist. And it turned out to be a huge success. And the tickets that we sold were raised money for orphanages, and everybody was happy to be involved in it. It was, you know, that was one thing we did culture-wise. The other thing I would say is I didn't really take advantage of the Art and Embassy program, but I did take advantage of one of our colleagues whose name is Pamela Bioli. She was the spouse of Tim Foster, who was our ambassador in Mauritius, and Mauritania, sorry. And Pamela is one of the most brilliant artists on the planet. Her work is hung in the Smithsonian. She is extremely good. And I persuaded her at great insurance cost to have a couple of her paintings on our walls. So that was.
yes, Toni and I know Pamela as well. Go ahead, Toni, and then Clayton.
I was going to say she also has a house which is unbelievably filled with the most beautiful Asian and African art. And if you go there, you just spend the whole time staring. And we had known Tim and Pamela in Greece when he was a junior officer. In fact, that's where he married Pamela. I think it was in Greece at any rate around that time.
Well, as a little aside on the subject of Pamela, the first time Tim saw one of her paintings, my husband saw one of her paintings, he said, well, now we know who the significant person in the embassy in Kenya is. And it is not the officers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, here too, I could only add, in a post like Athens, which offers so many cultural feasts, that we just used them all. We had symphonies, we had artists, we had music festivals, we had film festivals, we had sports stars, we had theater. There was no end to it. And I loved it. I just adored it. Monty and I are both film buffs, and anytime that we could show a great American movie, we just leapt at the opportunity. And then we had, of course, the great theaters in and around Athens, the open air ones, and ballet companies came, Leonard Bernstein came, playwrights came, actors came, there was no end. And our most hectic time was really June, July, and August, because we had so much going on. And we usually took our holidays in about February. And at the end of it all, I said, I think I can write a pretty good guidebook on the islands, Greek islands, in February.
Which are totally dead.
Which
Clayton,
is
what
when
about
I
what
saw
about
them.
you and culture in Hawaii?
We also did everything we could to promote American culture. And one of the things that we were most proud of is our Art in Embassies exhibition. It was a celebration of the diversity of the country. Sorry, it's like one of those things that I think was even typical of my experience as an ambassador's spouse, where it's like, I never really felt like I had any time, any space for myself, because it was like, there's always so much going on with kids, with, having the house open for events. But with regard to our Art in Embassies program, we were especially inspired by President Obama's second inaugural address, when he talked about from Seneca Falls to Selma to Stonewall. And so we wanted to present to everybody coming to the residence that story of America's march toward greater rights, civil rights for all of us, all Americans. And, tie that theme in with, I think, Vietnam's aspirations as well, to be a country where everybody can participate regardless of their background. So that had a lot of meaning for us, and people seem to receive and appreciate that message too.
So the theme of inclusivity. Well, I want to talk about balancing your professional life with being the spouse of an ambassador. I know for myself, I gave up my psychotherapy private practice after 27 years, and I left my teaching position at George Mason University. But when I got to Sarajevo, I wanted to have a life outside the embassy as well as being the ambassador's spouse in the embassy. I was invited to teach at the University of Sarajevo, which was a fantastic experience. I think it was similar to what Vicki did at AFAD University, where you get to meet the up and coming kids and talk to them about their experiences. And of course, in Sarajevo, their experiences had been in the war when they were younger, when they were in junior high. But I did that, and I also taught in Athens. I did a lot of advocacy work about counter trafficking, a lot of public awareness, and then teacher training in the region when I was both in Sarajevo and in Athens, traveling to Cyprus and Kosovo, back to Bosnia, and all of those things. So I wanted to ask you how you balanced your professional life when you were also wearing the hat of the ambassador's spouse and had those responsibilities and duties within the embassy. Gretchen, I see you nodding your head.
Well, yeah, and I noticed there's a question from Michelle. Hi, Michelle. It's great to have you with us about ethics and other things, because for us as tandems, that's the biggest concern you have, is nepotism and line of authority and even perceived, influence or involvement in my spouse's, in my career. We were lucky in some ways. First in Saudi Arabia, we had gone out, David was the DCM, I was the consul general, with an ambassador who was to follow us. And it ended up being the end of the first Bush, the senior administration. And of course, he lost re-election and the Clinton people came in. So we ended up without an ambassador for 2 years. So it wasn't technically a, we had a nepotism arrangement worked out with an ambassador who was to come to post. But we really worked very hard to, make sure there wasn't any appearance of a conflict of interest. And we utilized good friends in the embassy. And we said, you know, you just need to say, you need to tell me if you're hearing something, you're seeing something, you please, because, you know, we were very conscious that we were one of the few kind of working tandem arrangements in the world. And we really didn't want to screw it up for ourselves or for future colleagues who could be in that situation. It was pretty much the same for, by the way, in Saudi Arabia, David thought it was wonderful, actually, because when people came to him about visas, since I was the chief of the visa section, he could honestly say, oh, I can't have anything to do with visas, which he loved. He thought that was great. And in Egypt, I ended up working, as I said, for the Middle East Partnership Initiative, which was managed out of Washington, coordinated through our aid mission, which was also a regional mission. And I just had two wonderful colleagues in Washington who were committed to making it work and, you know, to making sure that we kept the nepotism lines clear. And, you know, that's Michelle, it's a really important point. You know, our regulations and rules are very clear and quite, you know, it is quite a serious issue to have any kind of conflict of interest. So we worked very hard, appreciated all the support of our colleagues who are committed to making work. And I see Michelle, Toni Verstandig, absolutely. You know, she's so shy and retiring, Toni, right? So she was a tremendous person in Washington, being very, very supportive. Absolutely.
So Clayton, you were a Foreign Service officer as well. You were a tandem, but you took leave without pay when Ted was ambassador. So what were the kinds of activities that you did professionally, as well as being the spouse of the ambassador?
So for part of the time, so we went to Hanoi with me being on leave without pay status. I was also in a correspondence-based part-time law course. So that was a way that, you know, I stayed intellectually stimulated and had sort of my own thing to do. But, you know, it was a challenge because of like all these other opportunities and demands as a result of being the spouse of the ambassador. And so I found I had to be really careful about just making time for things that were just for me, like, you know, my law school courses. And then during the middle of our time in Hanoi, I had an opportunity to reactivate within the Foreign Service and work remotely from Hanoi, reporting back to Washington. And so, Gretchen, what you were talking about with all the, you know, ethics and all this, we ran that, all of that had to be reviewed, and thankfully everything was checked off. And so I have this habit sometimes to take on just a lot, because law school was enough, and then, you know, taking on this full-time job made it even more of a challenge, an opportunity to be really focused with my time and be very clear about what I could do and what I needed more support with. And I prayed a lot, and thankfully, you know, did that work, finished law school and passed the bar exam, you know, and hopefully was a supportive enough spouse and a present enough parent, because it was all a lot. But I like to be busy, so.
Could I ask if you're practicing?
So I think a lot of us were checking in with the legal department, the State Department. I know I was saying, may I do this? May I do that? So balancing your professional life, balancing your family life. Clayton had 2 little weenie kids. Toni had 4 kids when her husband was ambassador, and they were teenagers. Gretchen had teenagers when David was ambassador, 3 teenagers when David was ambassador in Egypt. So that was a balancing act, but I think all of us have in common, we like being busy. Like Clayton said, we like having a lot of balls in the air and doing that. So let me do a round robin as we're wrapping up. I was going to ask you about the joys and then the challenges. I think I'll do the challenges first. Just we'll do a round robin. What was the greatest challenge of being the spouse of the ambassador, just quickly once, and then we'll go around what were the greatest joys. So anybody can start. Clayton.
Just communication, because communication's hard anyway. It's something that one has to be intentional about. But for me and for Ted and me, with all of this going on, and he was living his dream, there was nothing else in the world he wanted to do more than what he was doing right then. And you know, I wanted to support him, and at the same time, there were times that I needed to. Actually, there were times when I actually had to make appointments for us to meet to just talk about personal stuff, you know, like family, logistics, whatever. So I found I had to be a lot more organized and intentional in our communications. You know, that was a big challenge.
Yeah, okay. Vicki, challenge, and then Toni, and then Gretchen.
I have to be honest with everybody who's watching this. The biggest challenge today is security. It is hands down for me. It was absolutely the biggest challenge because the entire emphasis is on protecting people, and that protection keeps you from doing the things you most want to do in the country that you're in. And I would say that for me, that was and I think for anybody going out now, the biggest challenge you have is in the name of security. We have moved Americans all together. And so if you want to do the foreign part of foreign service, it is twice as hard to do it. And you have to battle the regional security office every day to do it. And I don't know how we solve this, but I will say that this issue of balancing personal security, and especially if you're the ambassador and the ambassador's spouse, against the needs of the mission and the foreign and the interests of our country, that was by far, our biggest challenge, for sure.
And I want to say so many posts now are high threat posts, but to add to that challenge, I know for us in both Bosnia and in Greece, there was no spontaneity. You couldn't say on a Sunday afternoon, well, let's go for a walk or let's go out to a taverna, because you'd have to rustle up your bodyguards and have them work. So everything was on a schedule. But we took security very, very personally, because in our first post in Chiang Mai, our best friend was murdered. And in our second post, which was Athens, our best friend was killed by November 17th, which is a terrorist group. So the only time I argued with the security people was in Bosnia about bringing in children, because I thought we needed to be more of a normal post. So go ahead, Toni, and then Gretchen on the biggest challenge.
Yes, coming from an earlier age, that was not a problem until the end. Monty retired. Well, he had joined in 1947 as the Iron Curtain was coming down, and he retired in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. And I would say it was from the 80s on that we also became very conscious, having lost Dick Welch when he was DCM, and then two other people when he was there in the 80s as the ambassador. And I found that the hardest part was just what Vicki said, which was paying attention to the foreign side of the foreign service. I had always gone to every post feeling that I was a kind of cub reporter, that Monty met people in the government, but I met vegetable sellers and bus drivers and maids. And I felt that I contributed a kind of street level smarts to everything that he knew. Monty didn't know the price of bread, but I knew the price of everything. And I always tried to learn languages, and I really became very fluent in Greek. I had spoken French as a child, so I had no trouble in either the Congo or the Ivory Coast. I tried to learn Lingala in the Congo, and I got up to a certain point. Don't ask me now. And in Laos, I tried to learn Lao, and I found that it drove me nuts because it didn't have any tenses and it was easier using French. So at any rate, I always felt that speaking to the people of the nation in which you were living was the most important thing that I could offer. And it did become harder as we lost people. They were gunned down, driving their cars, walking out of their doors. And Monty and I had a lot of security at the end of our tour. I'm sure it got even more so. But Bonnie, I should say that he and I had a Volkswagen with Greek plates, and we would get in it and take a trip. And the RSO screamed and hollered, and we
those
just
were the
went
olden
ahead.
days.
And we were very lucky. No, I don't think we were smart. I think we were lucky.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Gretchen, biggest challenge and then biggest joy, and we'll go around the other way about those things, and then we'll open it up for questions.
You know, just thinking about the security issue, I lived in what were considered high threat posts. I mean, I was in Pakistan after the embassy was burned in 1979. We were in Syria with all sorts of hijackings next door, in Lebanon. And I don't know whether the world is less safe or whether it's just where there's more awareness of it, which makes us become more insular. I don't know. I feel so fortunate that I was able to focus. We had the world's best RSO in Cairo, and he made sure that my children and I were able to continue to get out. And I'm so grateful to John Freeze for that. But biggest challenge was also the biggest joy. Cairo, as you may know, and Riyadh at the same time, they're hard cities to get around. They're big cities with a lot of traffic. So our challenge, which was also the joy, was getting to all the events and things we wanted to do. I know my husband often felt that we had to make a choice, right? Because it'd be a half hour, supposedly, or an hour between things. And it was getting to do everything we wanted to do. And that's also a joy. I mean, to have all these fantastic options representing your country, getting to know a wonderful country and its people. So
much to do. So Toni, your greatest joy?
My greatest joy was seeing the world. It was something I loved doing, as easy as that. And it was paid for.
Vicki.
I would say the greatest joy was the people you meet and the friendships you make, and both within your own community and with the countries that you're in. And sometimes I would come home at night and I'd kind of pinch myself and say, wow, did I really have that conversation with that person? I mean, it's in many ways, it's a privilege to be attached to the Foreign Service and the opportunities that are presented as a result of that.
And in interviewing these 20 people, including you, most of you for these podcasts, that's what I'm hearing. It is a privilege. The State Department tries to take care of you as much as possible, including the security. But you get to see segments of society in different countries that you never would if you were just a tourist. So Clayton, greatest joy for you?
All of these that you mentioned have been joys for me. The greatest, I'd say, was to see Ted live his dream and to be a part of our family being a part of, that experience for him.
Okay, so running a little bit late. Kelly, can you come back and we'll take questions now from our viewers.
Yeah, you guys are good to go if you want to ask a few of the Q&A questions. You guys got a few more minutes left on the clock. Can you see them?
Yeah, can Clayton and other panelists speak about ways our institution can better support male or other non-female spouses in the Foreign Service? How can we ensure our other half can reach his or her full employment and leadership potential? Clayton.
I feel like it's such a big question. I even wrote an article in the Foreign Service Journal back in, I think it was 20, maybe it was 2009 or 2000, maybe it was 2010. But when I realized that that was a big moment for me when I left a post early, so that Ted and I could be together, because we had been as a tandem assigned to India together. That was our first and last assignment as a tandem. And then he got an opportunity that he couldn't refuse for his career in Jakarta, and I got one in Singapore, thinking it would be so close and all that, and it was really hard. Actually, maybe a lot harder than if I had been in Afghanistan or something. So I wrote about this with some recommendations that included, more support for teleworking, and thankfully some of that has come to pass, so that when I was in Hanoi, there was then an established domestic employee teleworking overseas program. I wasn't by far the first. So more of that. I'm sure there are many other policy prescriptions here, but I also think that it's very important, and it's something that I learned, maybe I could have appreciated it earlier, that I had to take responsibility for me, for my happiness, for my career, as best I could, and find ways to make it work. And not, it's great if there's institutional support, and sometimes there was, but also, it's my life. I gotta make my choices and do the best I can with them. So I wish I had something more to add, but that's the best I think I can do for right now.
Okay, Gretchen, I think you typed an answer to Kelly from Michelle. Here's one from Susanna. Did any of you ever feel that you could achieve things that your spouse could not, thanks to not being the official paid U.S. representative? Were you perceived as less political and therefore more approachable, for example? Anybody want to tackle that before I do?
Well, if I can just it's not quite exactly what I think Susanna was asking, but I found as a woman being able to work with women's communities in all of our, especially Saudi Arabia and Egypt, where people don't have impression that perhaps the women are, as involved, was just such a joy. And what an eye opener. I know people like Dee Dee Cutler can speak to this in spades, but incredible women doing incredible things, many of whom are still lifelong friends, for me. So I think that part of it, and I think maybe most of us as women, Clayton, could get into, especially in the Arab world, get into a community where it's much harder for a man to gain access. And so that to me was a really great pleasure of my and an advantage for me.
Yeah.
I would say that this is very true, and sometimes you find it in unexpected ways. We had a very difficult relationship in Sudan, and at the sort of bottom of this relationship, and we were being pulled out for security reasons, Tim had to meet with the then vice president he was then the foreign minister, Ali Osman Taha, and he took me to the meeting and to call on Mrs. Taha. And they ended up having a 2-hour meeting, and I was back with the women. And they had just had this little baby born. And I don't know, I can't keep my hands off babies. So I ended up holding the child of the foreign minister of the country that we were in this very difficult situation with. And the conversation among the women was so extraordinary. It ended up on birth control, and she told me that she had had her tubes tied because she didn't want any more children, and how difficult it was being the foreign minister's wife and blah. Anyway, but the consequence of that was to permanently break the ice with the Tahas. And later, when we went back to do a book on Sudan, Ali Osman Taha cut all of the red tape so that we could do this book of photographs. And that relationship was formed that day, me holding this 6-month-old baby. And, so you just don't know what the consequences of just having a little bit of a generous spirit are going to be.
Yeah.
And that's,
and being open.
Yeah, I think that's really, sometimes you just don't know what is going to make a difference. And sometimes it's just a kind word and a little bit of an open heart.
Exactly.
I mean, it sounds corny, but I really believe that. I think that,
true.
human.
Yeah. Toni.
I just wanted to add that I think now in the era of COVID, that teleworking has almost become normal. And I think that this might make it a lot easier for twofers or a spouse like Clayton, who would like to have his own job back, that it is going to be easier. I have a daughter, and she and her husband are twofers, and they're both in Kenya, and he has spent one of their long tour teleworking, and she is now going to spend their last year doing it, giving them a very pleasant long tour of 4 to 5 years, which would have been only 2 or 3. And this has all worked out well because they've got lots of kids and they're going to school and blah, blah, blah. So who on earth knows how the Foreign Service couple will be construed as we go along in this new whole world of people working from home or working from elsewhere, at any rate, which was unheard of.
Right.
When I was a spouse. You had to be there. And
yeah. So things have changed a lot.
It has changed so enormously. And I wish I could live another 100 years and I could see what the Foreign Service might actually look like for my grandkids.
Right, who might be Foreign Service officers. I want to circle back to that
question. They may never
question.
leave home. It may all be done from their bedroom.
The question about could a spouse do something that the ambassador in their official role could not get away with doing. And I know in Sarajevo, I was the second ambassador's spouse in that brand new country. And because of being a social worker and a psychotherapist, I was invited to a shelter for victims of trafficking who had thought that they were going to be waitresses in Italy and wound up being sex slaves in Bosnia. And I talked with them and I went many times and I learned about their stories. And so I feel like I could have a voice for public awareness, to tell people that these were not just paid prostitutes sending money home. I felt like I had a big voice, an entree that my husband as the ambassador didn't have. But when I first got to Greece, I gave a speech on the psychological effects of being a trafficking victim, and man, the press took off after me. Whoa, the first day, why isn't she home pouring tea? But then they realized that I had talked to hundreds of survivors of trafficking, and then I again became a voice of trafficking. And that's where my husband and I actually did a 1-2 punch on the Greek government to work together to enact laws, work with an NGO to start shelters. So there are things that we could do by having a high profile, I think, that puts us in a good position to advance causes. Kelly, I don't know if there are other questions. I think Clayton answered one, I answered one, and Gretchen was typing an answer to another. Are there other questions that I've missed? Whoa, sorry.
That looks like you've answered what was brought into the Q&A. I know there's so much more that we can all talk about and explore with this topic, but I think you guys have really covered it all. Just to wrap up the conversation, I first of all want to thank all of our amazing panelists for sharing your experiences during tonight's conversation. I also do want to thank our donors for their generous support. Their support allows us to offer these programs for free. And then I also want to thank Bonnie and the rest of the crew at ADST for partnering with us for this program. Without their help, this definitely would not have been possible. And I also want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I hope you really enjoyed hearing these experiences, and definitely stay tuned for ADST's podcast when it launches this fall. You'll be able to hear more from a lot of the people that you've heard from tonight. I do hope that you all will continue to stay up to date with both the Diplomacy Center Foundation and ADST by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you all again for joining us, and we hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you
so
Clayton,
much.
Vicki, Gretchen, Toni,
Bye,
for your
guys.
depth and breadth of experience. Bye, everybody.
you.
Thank you all. I was so
Bye.
glad to meet you and to learn so much about you. Bye-bye.